And we're off. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 430 of the All Dolphins podcast on this Friday, December 13th. Oh, Friday the 13th. I just realized that. Joined today
Wow.
by South Florida Sun Sentinel columnist Dave Hyde, who apparently just figured out it's Friday the 13th as well. No? Yes?
Yeah, and then Friday the 13th, I remember talking to Trace Armstrong, Dolphin great, and
Yeah.
talking to Templar Knights, Knights of the Templar, and him talking about how they were massacred on Friday the 13th, which led to the whole demonification of Friday the 13th. He was there's a reason he has risen to the
Yes.
levels he has in agent being a top-notch agent. So
Very smart dude. I always thought, I don't remember if he did any of that he'd be good for television because he was very sharp, great personality. And I'm trying to think, I don't recall him ever doing TV, but I think he would have been good for it.
yeah, I don't remember him doing TV, but he's agent to the star coaches now.
Yes, he is. And I'm joined by Dave and my obligatory lovely cup of iced coffee here. And since we're drifting back in time, we're going to start off with a hat tip on this Friday afternoon to the late, great Jason Jenkins, who has been selected as one of the 3 awards of excellence recipients for the Pro Football Hall of Fame for 2025, along with longtime NFL PR guy Pete Abitante and longtime Detroit Lions media relations guru Bill Keenis. So hat tip to the memory of Jason Jenkins. Job well
Well
done.
deserved, well deserved. Great work for the Dolphins, and all behind the scenes work, and one of the great losses in the franchise.
That is true.
And for us, I mean, the community, not just the franchise. His work in the community was more than anybody I've ever seen in any of our sports organizations, just reaching out and bringing the community, the team out to the community and the community into the team.
Yeah, and then his last title was like senior vice president of communications and community affairs, and he was doing a lot for the community. So again, major hat tip to the late great Jason Jenkins. And interestingly enough, Harvey Green was not received that award in 2024, longtime Dolphins media relations director. So from a current Dolphins standpoint, the big news of the day, of course, and I say big news, you know what, Dave? More so just because of the name.
Yeah.
Because in terms of the actual significance for the on-the-field product, was it really a massive deal that the Dolphins waived through a mutual understanding and wish Odell Beckham Jr.?
Well, he was always a bigger headline than he was productions. Right back to when they signed him.
Yep.
They signed him as a third receiver, to help out if there's injuries, but certainly not to be a frontliner the way his name and career and marquee and all that stuff. So, but in retrospect, what was the purpose of the signing? They said they knew he was hurt when they signed him, and there's a possibility of missing games. Why sign a third receiver with minimal upside if he's going to miss a quarter of the season? I never understood it.
Yeah, and before we continue, I am going to encourage you, as I always do, to please check out Miami Dolphins on SI.com. I wrote about Odell Beckham Jr. and the move from every single possible angle. There's like 4 stories about it on the site, all for free. My thing also is, though, if you look back, fans, or I should say certain fans, always made a bigger deal of the signing than the Dolphins did. Dolphins never made any grand proclamations of what he could do. And it was one of those, they didn't give him a ton of money. There were a lot of incentives, and it's basically, let's see if he can recapture some of his previous glory, but with the understanding that the whole thing, knowing that he needed offseason knee surgery, makes it weird to have signed him instead of waiting after the surgery, see what he looks like. But then there was never a time, I don't know, I mean, there was never a time where you looked at him and go, oh, we see flashes of the old OBJ there. To me, he just looked.
No, and he didn't participate when he missed camp. The off-season workouts, he wasn't there. I mean, it was very weird. And so again, we talk about team architecture. At least I do a lot. And they needed a third receiver. And you saw remember the second game in Buffalo, they brought in for some reason, Waddle and Hill were out of the game the same time, and twice on 2 plays, Tua threw to the third receiver, or the who was the first receiver, but the third receiver in order here, and one ricochet. I can't. Both of them were cut immediately. They
Rand
were.
DuBose and Robbie Chosen.
There we go. Thank you. You're much better with the details. These games, when they leave, they leave. But one pass went off the shoulder pads, was intercepted, I believe, and the other a wrong route was run, or wrong pass. I'm going with the route because Tua knows the offense, and so there was a cost to signing a you know Odell Beckham Jr. as a third receiver when he couldn't play because his team needs a third receiver.
But let's in all fairness, first of all, let me just for the sake of accuracy here, the receiver on whose shoulder the ball bounced was Grand DuBose, who was put on IR after that game. He's now back. He's been practicing. He'll be back on the 53 at some point. Robbie Chosen was waived. Let's also not forget, it wasn't just Odell Beckham at that time. This was week 2. River Craycraft was on IR because he injured a shoulder in the preseason against Jacksonville while scoring a touchdown. And Malik Washington, the rookie 6th-round pick, who has developed into a nice player, although I want to say something about him a little bit later on, about how I think certain members of the media in South Florida, whose names shall remain unspoken to protect their innocence, or overstating what the guy's doing. But Malik Washington was dealing, I believe it was a quad injury back then, so they didn't have him either. So they were down in numbers, and they were like kind of forced to go with those guys. And as it turned out, the real third receiving option didn't become Odell Beckham Jr., didn't become Malik Washington. It became Jonnu Smith, if not Devon Achane earlier in the season out of the backfield. So they got their third receiving option. It just wasn't a wide receiver.
Yeah, and Achane really has become the dynamic playmaker in the offense as far as moving them around, running the ball, receiver screens, shuffling them around, trying to find matchups. So, but you've seen the offense like in any season evolve as it goes along, and now to the point that they cut Odell Beckham, he wasn't needed, and I'm sure. Just reading the tea leaves, how these things lead. He said he realized I'm not going to get on the field. I'm never going to, and so something happened, and he's out of here.
Yeah, and the report that originally came out from NFL Network was that it was, again, a mutual parting of the ways. Mike McDaniel was asked about it, 4 different questions at his Friday presser. Didn't want to really go there as far as who initiated the conversation. If it wasn't the Dolphins would just cut them on their own.
Yeah.
So the second you're talking about a mutual parting of the ways, it's basically Beckham and his representation went to the Dolphins. And he didn't practice the past 2 days because of personal issues. McDaniel refused to say whether it was related to this. I kind of was talking to your colleague, Chris Perkins, watching practice yesterday, and I'm like, no, it wouldn't surprise me if it was just, you know what, he's out, he's checked out, he's out of here because he's got no role. His average snaps was like 13 snaps a game, 2 targets a game. That's not what he signed up for. But Dolphins were not going to give him any more than that because right now, Odell Beckham Jr., with all due respect, is very, very, very ordinary as a wide receiver. And this notion that now he's going to be on the market and immediately he's going to get picked up like this, I'm not so sure.
No, you really didn't see much when he was here. Now, we'll see where it goes, but and really the expectation was minimal in signing him. I mean, you looked at his numbers in Baltimore, and they're very third receiver numbers. Okay, and we didn't even reach that point. So the last thing the Dolphins need was some type of behind the scenes issues of a guy upset he's not getting the ball more or playing time at all. And we don't know that it became that, but it again, you read the tea leaves, something was going on that Odell Beckham probably wasn't happy with his role. And the Dolphins are saying, good for Mike McDaniel, and saying, look, we don't need any of this right now. We got to focus on Houston. In fact, one of the Odell Beckham questions, Mike was asked whether he has any regrets in signing Odell Beckham, and he said, "I regret that we're not talking about Houston."
Yeah.
So,
That's McDaniel. That's translations. Mike McDaniel's getting pissed about, okay, enough with the Beckham questions, but he's so nice that that's how he turned it into.
yeah,
But let's also contrast this with the situations with Calais Campbell, where they had a deal in place, according to Campbell's brother, to trade him to the the 49ers for fourth round pick. Mike McDaniel stepped in and like, no, we want to keep him. We need him for our move. Shaq Barrett wanted to come back. The Dolphins were like, you know what? No, sorry. And not only that, we're now waiving you so you can go sign with somebody else. So the Dolphins in those situations are going to be, all nice and play nicely with players and try to do right by them, but they're going to look out for themselves first, as they should, which basically could not scream more that they didn't feel that Odell Beckham Jr. was somebody important to keep, because otherwise they would have told him, even if Beckham had said, I don't like my role very much, I'd like to get a chance to go somewhere else, Dolphins would have said, dude, you're under contract. Sorry. So I think it was very much a mutual.
Yeah, it was probably a David Long situation where
Yeah.
he wanted his role got minimized. He wanted out. Now he landed on his feet in Detroit. I mean, I got to admit, I don't know how much he's playing. A lot of injuries upset there, but and it isn't just the Dolphins that's going. I mean, look at San Francisco last night. I'm drawing a blank on the linebacker's name who refused to go in the game because he had got
Andre Campbell.
That he had got leapfrogged. He lost his starting role, and they're asking him, no, I'm not going to go in the game. So I mean, there's some weird, as always, there's some weird things going on around the league.
Yeah, and the last point I want to make on Beckham before we move forward is, and this is going to go back to Malik Washington, who has been a very, very good rookie 6th round pick, but more because of the totality of what he does for the team: punt returner, kickoff returner, blocking on plays, and running on end arounds, as opposed to being a pass catcher. The dude has 10 catches for 54 yards on the season. So I think this notion that like Dolphins waived Odell Beckham Jr. to make more room for Malik Washington in the passing game, I'm not so sure. I think the one forgotten guy in the wide receiver core who can do what Odell Beckham Jr. can do very easily, was maybe the best wide receiver in training camp, got hurt and then came back.
Yeah.
He's been buried, and that's River Craycraft.
Yeah. Now he's got injury problems constantly because, everybody loves everybody on the team and the receiver. Look, when they have the draft, Tyreek Hill picks him number 1.
That's
so
right.
There's something about him that when you in practice you can see it, that you've seen a little in the preseason games, but you really haven't seen enough of it in a regular season because it seems like he's constantly hurt.
Yeah, but my guess is whatever they're losing with Beckham leaving, which based on, again, he had 9 catches for 55 yards, never more than 3 in a game, never more than 17 yards in a game. It's not much. I think that workload goes to River Craycraft.
And to put the nail in this story, I remember when Tua was asked about Beckham coming back and activating, and a couple months ago, and did he need to work with them? And look, he could have just sloughed it off. No, we'll be all right. No, he said, no, I can't throw them, and I can't. Basically, I need to work with him. I need to trust the routes he's going to run. And this shows a step Tua has taken, as opposed to, his first year in the league when there were like 4 receivers sitting out and 3 or 4 in training camp. And he's like, no, we'll be all right. We'll be all right. Now he's saying, no, they got to come in. He's got to come in here, and I got to work with them, understand. So the fact that he never really worked until, I don't know, when was he activated? October, 4 games in.
Yeah.
He came off the IR, and really he hadn't practiced until then, and so it was a bizarre story from right from the start with Odell Beckham Jr. It was sort of like the Anthony Carter, for historians. He had a very brief,
I mean, Chris or Anthony Carter?
Excuse me, Chris Carter.
Yeah.
Chris Carter, very big name, great career, Hall of Fame career, and yet you get him at the very end, and he's not the same guy.
No, and he was dropping passes when the guy may have been the
Yeah.
most sure-handed receiver in the history of the NFL. He comes to the Dolphins and oops. No, and they were in one of the stories I wrote, I mentioned a few of those guys. It's not the first time this has happened. Thurman Thomas in 2000, although it wasn't his fault, he blew out a knee, but he had become just strictly a receiver out of the backfield. Arian Foster most recently in 2016. Injuries, and all of a sudden, as he told a national podcast, he's on the sideline looking in the stands and thinking about the book he's going to read when he gets home and decide, you know what? Yeah, that's not for me anymore. So, I lied. I apologize, everyone, for lying, because I do have one more point on this, because you mentioned Tua's comments about Odell Beckham Jr. Whenever he was asked, Tua was always very polite, complimented him on what a great guy he is and all that. Getting to know him has been great.
Yeah.
Never once could you sense any excitement from him from a football standpoint.
Right.
Like, oh, it's going to be cool when we get him on the field. Not once. Tua never said a cross word about him. But again, there was no excitement. Okay, let's attack the matchup Sunday at NRG Stadium. I'm sure it's the 17th name they've had. I can rely on that stadium. I think it used to be, and I forget those names. Anyway, they changed. Anyway, it's NRG Stadium now against the 8-5 Houston Texans. How are we feeling right now, Dave Hyde?
I think it's a great matchup for the Dolphins.
Okay.
I really think it's a good one. When you consider factoring a winning team on the road, first of all, on the road, it's a great environment, indoors, controlled weather, obviously,
Yeah.
and that's what the Dolphins want right now. What's what they always want, but they got it in this matchup. Then you go to let's go to Houston's defense. It's I was talking to someone who knows a lot more football than I do. It's very similar to the Jets defense, because you look where both coordinators come from, out of the San Francisco system, and they put in very similar systems. Robert Saleh and D'Amico Ryans, and so it's almost like a lot of the stuff that the Dolphins worked on against for the Jets will carry over to the Texans. So right from there, I'd say the first two things are really in the Dolphins' favor right now. And the other thing is the Texans are a lot like the Dolphins in that they've beaten up on the bad teams.
Yep.
And had trouble with the good teams. And they haven't come out of that spin, I don't think. They're still, they're not, at the end of last year, they looked like a young team on the rise. And they never really rose this year. They just kind of maintained their offensive line's trouble. I mean bad. They've had injuries and not replaced guys. So I think this is a really good matchup for the Dolphins.
No, I do too. And it looks a lot better now than it did at the start of the season, as so have so many of their matchups, because I thought, like you said, I thought Houston was massively on the rise. They're 8-5. They have one win against a team with a winning record, which is a really good one. They beat the Bills 23-20 in week 5.
Cool.
So that's a big time win. Other than that, they've swept the Colts. They beat the Bears, the Jaguars, Patriots, Cowboys, and Jaguars again. So, and barely beat the Jaguars in the last game. They beat them by 3. So no, I agree with you. I think it's a good spot for the Dolphins. And if the Texans are going to use the same defense, which is basically to play off the wide receivers, I mean, it's going to be a lot of nice pitch and catch with Tua and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And I'm not even sure some of those completions can be so quick that it's going to minimize whatever concern there is about the Dolphins' offensive tackles. Patrick Paul on the left side, thinking Kendall Lamb on the right side, maybe even if it's not Kendall Lamb, Jackson Carman against Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter, which under normal circumstances would look like a mismatch in Houston's favor. But even if they get there in 2.5 seconds, if the ball is out in 1.5 seconds, they're not going to be effective.
Yeah, I mean, Houston does. I think they rank second in the league in sacks.
Mm-hmm.
But the way the Dolphins are structured, as you said, that they've found a way, and it speaks to the offense they run and Tua's ability to get the ball out quick and McDaniel's ability to draw up, get players open, um, to almost negate a pass rush,
Yep.
and make it. It'd almost be if I was playing the Dolphins, I you consider at times rushing three and dropping back eight and clogging those, especially the short passing lanes, short to intermediate passing lanes over the middle, and be ready for the little flare outs, the screens. But it'll again, I think this is the more I look at it, the more I like the Dolphins' chances in this game.
I think so too. I'm going to come up with my final official prediction that the entire world is waiting on Saturday morning. Saturday morning. I'm kind of leaning Dolphins, except I've done that earlier this year, including the Green Bay game, and I was like, "Oh my Lord, what was I thinking?" I look bad.
Same here. I picked them over Green Bay. I thought it'd be an easy game against the Jets. So take my optimism here and with a grain of salt, maybe that sometimes you look at the team you cover a little too much, both ways, positive
Absolutely.
and negative.
Yeah, especially when you get out of training camp and all you see is Dolphins against Dolphins. You don't get some kind of like big picture of what they are. And we mentioned Houston having only beaten one team with a winning record. Well, Dolphins are in the same boat, and that one team is now
a lot of similarities between these teams, I think.
No, it's an excellent point. We're going to close with this. We would be remiss not to touch upon it because you wrote a column about this week. Very good column, by the way, at sunsentinel.com. Check it out. I was going to address it. I'd yet to address it. I don't want to completely write what you wrote. Maybe I will just change the byline, some words here and there, and just voila. I got to come up with a different approach.
You have my permission.
Okay. Well, thank you. Laremy Tunsil, obviously. And speaking to Cole Thompson, the managing editor of Texans Wire, who was our guest on Behind Enemy Lines earlier this week, he is raving about how well the guy's playing minus the penalties. And then having said that, you kind of had a different take on looking back at the trade and how it's played out. Because and in my take, it's like, and it's kind of what you said, by itself, I don't know how you can complain about the Dolphins getting the bounty of draft picks they got, which was more than they gave Kansas City for Tyreek Hill, even if we're not necessarily completely crazy with what they did with them.
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects to the trade, and I use Jimmy Johnson, who always talks about the great train robbery, as he called it, the Herschel Walker trade, where they got all sorts of picks. But he said that isn't what made the trade. It was great to get all those picks, but you had to turn those picks into players. He turned them into like 4 Pro Bowlers, a Hall of Famer. The Dolphins, if they were going to jumpstart, remember, this was the start of the signal, this new plan, that trade. Okay, here we go. We're going to tank. The front office is tanking. The coach is on his own, as it turned out, but the front office is tanking. We're accumulating draft picks.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at what they got with it. I agree. In looking at it, they got some nice bounty, a treasure chest of draft picks to deal with. And then they got lucky that Deshaun Watson imploded on the Texans, and all of a sudden, the first year with the draft picks, Houston picked 26 because they were a contending team. That's why they wanted Laremy Tunsil. But then they imploded, and all of a sudden, the Dolphins were holding the 3rd pick overall. So, but look, you can go down the list of names they got. Noah Igbenogany, Solomon Kinley in the first draft. There's 2 misses. They got Jalen Waddle in the second year. He's a nice player, right? I mean, everybody sees his talent, but you look at, and I wrote about Detroit's draft room. As soon as the Dolphins announced Waddle, erupted. They got Penei Sewell, who's, if you took a vote, he'd be the best offensive lineman in the league right now.
He's up there.
So you got, and you look into, how are you going to build a team? There's a foundational piece that you could have for 10 years, before he goes in the Hall of Fame. So you go down the list. Now they used one of the first round picks for Tyreek Hill, one for Bradley Chubb. and a lot of money. And why did they need to get those? Because all of a sudden they reversed philosophy, and yeah, and then they with an Igbenogany and missing, so that all of a sudden they got to spend money on Jalen Ramsey. Okay, and you look at when they're missing draft picks, they're filling in with expensive and
Mhm.
older guys with a lot of wear and tear on them. Talents. Look, any of us could have made. Oh, do you want Jalen Ramsey for a third round pick? Okay,
And
we'll take him.
And Hunter Long. Don't forget Hunter Long.
Okay, and Hunter Long. Um, okay, and then who am I missing? There were a couple more picks. Channing Tindall and Eric Izukama came in the draft. So when they made the trade, the idea was they're going to get some foundational pieces. And excuse me, there's also um, the safety for the Dolphins. I'm drawing the
Javon Holland.
yeah. He came in the trade too. His pick,
Uh,
36 overall, second rounder. So again, they got some good players, but they didn't get the guy who's going to be in the Pro Bowl or the foundational piece. I don't think they can build on that would have made this trade great. Instead, and also all of a sudden they lose a young Pro Bowl left tackle, and look how the trouble they've had replacing him. Um, they drafted Austin Jackson. He didn't work out. They moved him to guard. Then finally, third year in the league, he finds a home at right tackle. They drafted Liam Eichenberg, traded a third round pick for him, and took him with the second round pick. Um, he didn't work out, so they have to spend money, big money to get the free agent, and so that goes on the cost to me in the trade too, because that's the guy you got to replace. So, um, like with most things with the Dolphins in the last 25 years, it comes to architecture, personnel decisions, how are you going to build a team, who are you going to build it with, and ultimately who are the draft picks, because those are the guys. Anybody could go out and say Tyreek Hill's a great player. Here's a bunch of draft picks and a bunch of money, but we got better because here's Jalen Ramsey. He's a great player, but all of a sudden these guys are over 30, and if you didn't win, if you're not going to win with them when they're in their window, then you're going on the downside of expensive players, and that's where you run into trouble.
Yeah, and it's always tough when you're dealing with these multiplayer trades.
Yeah.
I've heard the adage, I don't know who said it or where I read it, like whoever got the best player won that trade. And the thing with Jimmy and his trade of Herschel Walker that needs to be pointed out is Herschel Walker rushed for 1,500 yards his last full year in Dallas, where I think he got ridiculously overvalued all of a sudden. And the rest of his career, which was 5 or 6 more years, he had one other 1,000-yard seasons. So it's not like he really produced for the Vikings, which made the trade even worse. With this particular trade, Tunsil's been very, very good. I think he's made the Pro Bowl every year. He's been in Houston. Is this one of those where you regret? I mean, again, 2 1s and a 2. Yeah, to me, it's impossible to knock the trade, even if the Dolphins didn't quite maximize the return in terms of what they got with the picks as much as they could have. So,
yeah, and that's an NBA idea. Who gets the best player in a trade? That's because 5 guys go on the court, right? So who got the
that
best
makes more
player?
sense.
Okay, with the NFL, it's really a lot. There's a lot more moving parts. How do you spend the money? Where are you at really in your team building? I mean, to me, here's the ultimate diss on the Dolphins in this trade is Houston got them to be a piece because they were contending. They finished 26th in the draft that year. That told you they could have,
Yep.
they had a nice season. And then they collapsed and they rebuilt under a whole new management, whole new regime. Nick Cesario comes in there as GM, and they won a playoff game last year. And they're, you could argue, okay, they're in a lesser division and all that, but it's not like the AFC East, other than Buffalo, right now is anything either. So but the point being, they collapsed, they rebuilt, and they won a playoff game, and the Dolphins are still trying to win a playoff game. I mean, so it's yeah, again, so much of this issues we talk about come down to personnel decisions and team building concepts, architecture of a team.
And by the way, when you mentioned the Texans having the advantage of playing the AFC South, Dolphins maybe should be playing in the AFC South. They had the chance, for those not familiar with that story, as reported by The Athletic a few years back, and confirmed that when realignment came to the NFL in 2002, when Houston entered the NFL, the league wanted the Dolphins to join Jacksonville, Tennessee, and Houston, the AFC South, and the Dolphins were like, "Nah, we're good. We want those rivalries with."
Yeah, I agree with the Dolphins. I mean, especially South Florida. Come on, South Florida is so full of the northeastern feel to it that in traditional rivalries, no, not doing that, not going that route.
Really?
Would have been easier. That would have been easier though.
Especially nowadays, with the way the team is constructed, we wouldn't have to worry about cold weather games within the division in December, because you would have been playing at Jacksonville, at Tennessee, or at Houston. So no issue. Well, Tennessee was bad in 2021, but that's one that could always be revisited. And I understand from a business standpoint and from a marketing standpoint, I'm with you. I get it. It just seemed from I don't know if travel's not necessarily that big of an issue in the NFL if you're going to do it like
it is to sports writers though. Travel is a big issue to sports, and December is a big issue too.
See, there you go. Okay, well, we shall find out what happens on Sunday. It's obviously a huge game for the Dolphins. I don't even know what the line is anymore. I think the Texans are favored by 1 or 2 points. This is that kind of game. It should be a good one to toss up. And if the Dolphins win, they're 7-7. They have San Francisco coming in next Sunday after they just about were eliminated from playoff contention on Thursday night, with one of their players, as Dave mentioned, Devondre Campbell, walking off the field in the third quarter because, I used to be a starter. Dre Greenlaw came back after a year on PUP after tearing his Achilles in the Super Bowl. Oh, and you're going to give him the starting nod instead of Moi, who's been starting the whole year? Whoa, I'm offended. Devondre going the game. The linebackers are hurt. No, thank you.
Boy, the last 5 games when the schedule came out, between the opponent and the venue, it looked to be really tough.
Yep.
And now you see the Dolphins' path. You see the path that's sitting there for them. They just gotta take it.
They do, and at some point they will need probably some help from other teams. But again, they got to take care of their own business. That would be step one. So that's going to wrap it up. Thanks everyone for watching. Please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check out my friend Dave Hyde's work at the South Florida Sun Sentinel I'm losing my voice. I'm getting all choked up. At sunsentinel.com. You see the Twitter handle. If you're listening on the audio podcast, it's at Dave Hyde Sports. And that's going to do it for today. I'm going to be joined by Chris Perkins on a special Saturday edition. And then we'll have the post-game recap on Sunday. Until then, have a great rest of your Friday evening, everyone. Thank you.